11 Minutes by Poulo Coelho. Read by Derek Jacobi and Amelia Fox. Once upon a time, there was a prostitute called Maria. Wait a minute. Once upon a time is how all the best children's stories begin. And prostitute is a word for adults. How can I start a book with this apparent contradiction? But since at every moment of our lives we all have one foot in a fairy tale and the other in the abyss, let's keep that beginning. Once upon a time, there was a prostitute called Maria. Like all prostitutes, she was born both innocent and a virgin, and as an adolescent, she dreamed of meeting the man of her life, rich, handsome, intelligent, of getting married, having 2 children who would grow up to be famous, and living in a lovely house with a sea view. Her father was a traveling salesman, her mother a seamstress, and her hometown in the interior of Brazil had only 1 cinema, 1 nightclub, and 1 bank, which was why Maria was always hoping that one day, without warning, her Prince Charming would arrive, sweep her off her feet, and take her away with him so that they could conquer the world together. While she was waiting for her Prince Charming, all she could do was dream. She fell in love for the first time when she was 11, en route from her house to school. On the first day of term, she discovered that making the same journey was a boy who lived in her neighborhood. They never exchanged a word, but gradually Maria became aware that, for her, the best part of the day were those moments spent going to school. Moments of dust, thirst, and weariness, with the sun beating down, the boy walking fast, and with her trying her hardest to keep up. This was repeated month after month. Maria, who hated studying, and whose only other distraction in life was television, waited eagerly for each journey to school, and, unlike other girls her age, she found the weekends deadly dull. Given that the hours pass more slowly for a child than for an adult, she suffered greatly and found the days far too long, simply because they allowed her only 10 minutes to be with the love of her life, and thousands of hours to spend thinking about him, imagining how good it would be if they could talk. Then it happened. One morning, on the way to school, the boy came up to her and asked if he could borrow a pencil. Maria didn't reply. In fact, she seemed rather irritated by this unexpected approach, and even quickened her step. She had felt petrified when she saw him coming towards her, terrified that he might realize how much she loved him, how eagerly she had waited for him, how she had dreamed of taking his hand, of walking straight past the school gates with him and continuing along the road to the end, where, people said, there was a big city, film stars and television stars, cars, lots of cinemas, and an endless number of fun things to do. For the rest of the day, she couldn't concentrate on her lessons, tormented by her own absurd behavior, but at the same time relieved, because she knew the boy had noticed her too, and that the pencil had just been an excuse to start a conversation, because when he came over to her, she had noticed that he already had a pen in his pocket. She waited for the next time, and during that night, and the nights that followed, she went over and over what she would say to him, until she found the right way to begin a story that would never end. But there was no next time, for although they continued to walk to school together, with Maria sometimes a few steps ahead, clutching a pencil in her right hand, and at other times walking slightly behind him so that she could gaze at him tenderly, he never said another word to her, and she had to content herself with loving and suffering in silence until the end of the school year. During the interminable school holidays that followed, she woke up one morning to find that she had blood on her legs, and was convinced she was going to die. She decided to leave a letter for the boy, telling him that he had been the great love of her life, and then she would go off into the bush and doubtless be killed by one of the 2 monsters that terrorized the country people round about, the werewolf and the mula se cabeza, said to be a priest's mistress, transformed into a mule and doomed to wander the night, That way, her parents wouldn't suffer too much over her death. For although constantly beset by tragedies, the poor are always hopeful, and her parents would persuade themselves that she had been kidnapped by a wealthy, childless family, but would return one day rich and famous, while the current and eternal love of her life would never forget her, torturing himself each day for not having spoken to her again. She never did write that letter because her mother came into the room, saw the blood-stained sheets, smiled and said, "Now you're a young woman." Maria wondered what the connection was between the blood on her legs and her becoming a young woman, but her mother wasn't able to give her a satisfactory explanation. She just said that it was normal, and that from now on, for 4 or 5 days a month, she would have to wear something like a doll's pillow between her legs. Maria asked if men used some kind of tube to stop the blood going all over their trousers, and was told that this was something that only happened to women. Maria complained to God, but in the end she got used to menstruating. She could not, however, get used to the boy's absence, and kept blaming herself for her own stupidity in running away from the very thing she most wanted. The day before the new term began, she went to the only church in town and vowed to the image of St. Anthony that she would take the initiative and speak to the boy. The following day, she put on her smartest dress and set off to school, thanking God that the holidays had finally ended. But the boy did not appear, and another agonizing week passed until she found out through some school friends that he had left town. "He's gone somewhere far away," someone said. At that moment, Maria learned that certain things are lost forever. She learned, too, that there was a place called Somewhere Far Away, that the world was vast and her own town very small, and that in the end the most interesting people always leave. She, too, would like to leave, but she was still very young. Nevertheless, looking at the dusty streets of the town where she lived, she decided that one day she would follow in the boy's footsteps. On the 9 Fridays that followed, she took communion, as was the custom in her religion, and asked the Virgin Mary to take her away from there. She grieved for a while, too, and tried vainly to find out where the boy had gone, but no one knew where his parents had moved to. It began to seem to Maria that the world was too large, that love was something very dangerous, and that the Virgin was a saint who inhabited a distant heaven and didn't listen to the prayers of children. 3 years passed. She learned geography and mathematics. She began following the soaps on TV. At school, she read her first erotic magazine, and she began writing a diary, describing her humdrum life and her dreams of adventure, her desire to experience firsthand the things they told her about in class: the ocean, snow, men in turbans, elegant women covered in jewels. When she had just turned 15, she fell in love with a boy she had met in a Holy Week procession. She did not repeat her childhood mistake. They talked, became friends, and started going to the cinema and to parties together. She also noticed that, as had happened with the first boy, she associated love more with the person's absence than with their presence. She would miss her boyfriend intensely, would spend hours imagining what they would talk about when next they met, and remembering every second that they had spent together, trying to work out what she had done right and what she had done wrong. She liked to think of herself as an experienced young woman who had already allowed one grand passion to slip from her grasp, and who knew the pain that this caused. And now she was determined to fight with all her might for this man and for marriage, determined that he was the man for marriage, children, and the house by the sea. She went to talk to her mother, who said imploringly, "But you're still very young, my dear. You got married to my father when you were 16. Her mother preferred not to explain that this had been because of an unexpected pregnancy, and so she used the "things were different then" argument and brought the matter to a close. The following day, Maria and her boyfriend went for a walk in the countryside. They talked a little. Then he took her in his arms and kissed her. Her first kiss. How she had dreamed of that moment. And the landscape was special, too. The herons flying, the sunset, the wild beauty of that region, the sound of distant music. Maria pretended to draw back, but then she embraced him and repeated what she had seen so often on the cinema and on TV. She rubbed her lips against his with some violence, moving her head from side to side, half rhythmic, half frenzied. Now and then she felt the boy's tongue touch her teeth and thought it felt delicious. Then suddenly he stopped kissing her and asked, "Don't you want to?" What was she supposed to say? Did she want to? Of course she did. But a woman shouldn't expose herself in that way, especially not to her future husband. Otherwise, he would spend the rest of his life suspecting that she might say yes that easily to anything. She decided not to answer. He kissed her again, this time with rather less enthusiasm. Again he stopped, red-faced, and Maria knew that something was very wrong, but she was afraid to ask what it was. She took his hand, and they walked back to the town together, talking about other things as if nothing had happened. That night, using the occasional difficult word because she was sure that one day everything she had written would be read by someone else, and because she was convinced that something very important had happened, she wrote in her diary,
"When we meet someone and fall in love, we have a sense that the whole universe is on our side. I saw this happen today as the sun went down, and yet if something goes wrong, there is nothing left. No herons, no distant music, not even the taste of his lips. How is it possible for the beauty that was there only minutes before to vanish so quickly? Life moves very fast. It rushes us from heaven to hell in a matter of seconds."
The following day she talked to her girlfriends. They had all seen her going out for a walk with her future betrothed. After all, it is not enough just to have a great love in your life. You must make sure that everyone knows what a desirable person you are. They were dying to know what had happened, and Maria, very full of herself, said that the best bit was when his tongue touched her teeth. One of the other girls laughed. "Didn't you open your mouth?" Suddenly, everything became clear. His question, his disappointment. What for? To let him put his tongue inside. What difference does it make? Oh, it's not something you can explain. That's just how people kiss. There was much giggling, pretend pity, and gleeful feelings of revenge among these girls, who had never had a boy in love with them. Maria pretended not to care, and she laughed too, although her soul was weeping. She secretly cursed the films she had seen, which had failed to show the essential, most important thing. She made up the perfect excuse. "I didn't want to give myself at once because I wasn't sure, but now I realize that you are the love of my life," and waited for the next opportunity. She didn't see him until 3 days later at a party, and he was holding the hand of a friend of hers, the one who had asked her about the kiss. She again pretended that she didn't care, and survived until the end of the evening talking with her girlfriends and pretending not to notice their pitying looks. When she arrived home, though, she allowed her universe to crumble. She cried all night, suffered for the next 8 months, and concluded that love clearly wasn't made for her, and that she wasn't made for love. She considered becoming a nun and devoting the rest of her life to a kind of love that didn't hurt and didn't leave painful scars on the heart. love for Jesus. At school, they learned about missionaries who went to Africa, and she decided that there lay an escape from her dull existence. She planned to enter a convent. She learned first aid. According to some teachers, a lot of people were dying in Africa. Worked harder in her religious knowledge classes, and began to imagine herself as a modern-day saint, saving lives and visiting jungles inhabited by lions and tigers. However, her 15th year brought with it not only the discovery that you were supposed to kiss with your mouth open, and that love is, above all, a cause of suffering, she discovered a third thing: masturbation. It happened almost by chance, as she was touching her genitals while waiting for her mother to come home. She used to do this when she was a child, and she liked the feeling until one day her father saw her and slapped her hard, without explaining why. She never forgot being hit like that, and she learned she shouldn't touch herself in front of other people, since she couldn't do it in the street, and she didn't have a room of her own at home. She forgot all about the pleasurable sensation. Until that afternoon, almost 6 months after the kiss. Her mother was late coming home, and since there was nothing interesting on the TV, she began examining her own body, in the hope that she might find some unwanted hair which could immediately be tweezed out. To her surprise, she noticed a small gland above her vagina. She began touching it, and found that she couldn't stop. The feelings provoked were so strong and so pleasurable, and her whole body, particularly the part she was touching, became tense. After a while, she began to enter a kind of paradise. The feelings grew in intensity until she noticed that she could no longer see or hear clearly, and then she moaned with pleasure and had her first orgasm. Orgasm. It was like floating up to heaven, and then parachuting slowly down to earth again. Her body was drenched in sweat, but she felt complete, fulfilled, and full of energy. So that was what sex was. How wonderful! Not like in erotic magazines in which everyone talked about pleasure but seemed to be grimacing in pain. And no need for a man who liked a woman's body but had no time for her feelings. She could do it on her own. She did it again, this time imagining that a famous movie star was touching her. And once more she floated up to paradise and parachuted down again, feeling even more energized. Just as she was about to do it for a third time, her mother came home. Maria talked to her girlfriends about her new discovery, not saying that she had only discovered it a few hours before. All of them, apart from 2, knew what she was talking about, but none of them had ever dared to raise the subject. It was Maria's turn to feel like a revolutionary, to be the leader of the group, inventing an absurd secret confessions game, which involved asking everyone their favorite method of masturbation. She learned various techniques, like lying under the covers in the height of summer, because, one of her friends assured her, sweating helped. Using a goose feather to touch herself there. She didn't yet know what the place was called. Letting a boy do it to you. Maria thought this unnecessary. Using the spray in the bidet. She didn't have one at home, but she would try it as soon as she visited one of her richer friends. Anyway, once she had discovered masturbation, she abandoned forever the idea of a religious life. Masturbation gave her enormous pleasure, and yet the church seemed to imply that sex was the greatest of sins. She heard various tales from those same girlfriends. Masturbation gave you spots, could lead to madness or even pregnancy. Nevertheless, despite all these risks, she continued to pleasure herself. At the same time, she grew more and more insecure in her relationships with boys, and more determined to leave the place where she lived. She fell in love a third time and a fourth. She knew how to kiss now, and when she was alone with her boyfriends, she touched them and allowed herself to be touched. But something always went wrong, and the relationship would end precisely at the moment when she was sure that this was the person with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. After a long time, she came to the conclusion that men brought only pain, frustration, suffering, and a sense of time dragging. One afternoon, watching a mother playing with her 2-year-old son, she decided that she could still think about a husband, children, and a house with a sea view, but that she would never fall in love again, because love spoiled everything. And so Maria's adolescent years passed. She grew prettier and prettier, and her sad, mysterious air brought her many suitors. She went out with one boy and with another, and she dreamed and suffered, despite her promise to herself never to fall in love again. On one such date, she lost her virginity on the back seat of a car. She and her boyfriend were touching each other with more than usual ardor. The boy got very worked up, and she, weary of being the only virgin amongst her group of friends, allowed him to penetrate her. Unlike masturbation, which took her up to heaven, this hurt her and caused a trickle of blood, which left a stain on her skirt that took ages to wash out. There wasn't the magical sensation of her first kiss, the herons flying, the sunset, the music. But she would rather not think about that. She made love with the boy a few more times, although she had to threaten him first, saying that if he didn't, she would tell her father he had raped her. She used him as a way of learning, trying in every way she could to understand what pleasure there was in having sex with a partner. She couldn't understand it. Masturbation was much less trouble and far more rewarding. But all the magazines, the TV programs, books, girlfriends, everything, absolutely everything, said that a man was essential. Maria began to think that she must have some unspeakable sexual problem. So she concentrated still more on her studies, and for a while forgot about that marvelous, murderous thing called love. From Maria's diary, when she was 17.
My aim is to understand love. I know how alive I felt when I was in love, and I know that everything I have now, however interesting it might seem, doesn't really excite me. But love is a terrible thing. I've seen my girlfriend suffer, and I don't want the same thing to happen to me. They used to laugh at me and my innocence, but now they ask me how it is I manage men so well. I smile and say nothing, because I know that the remedy is worse than the pain. I simply don't fall in love. With each day that passes, I see more clearly how fragile men are, how inconstant, insecure, and surprising they are. A few of my girlfriend's fathers have propositioned me, but I've always refused. At first I was shocked, but now I think it's just the way men are. Although my aim is to understand love, and although I suffer to think of the people to whom I gave my heart, I see that those who touched my heart failed to arouse my body, and that those who aroused my body failed to touch my heart.
She turned 19, having finished secondary school, and found a job in a draper's shop, where her boss promptly fell in love with her. By then, however, Maria knew how to use a man without being used by him. She never let him touch her, although she was always very coquettish, conscious of the power of her beauty. The power of beauty. What must the world be like for ugly women? She had some girlfriends who no one ever noticed at parties, or whom men were never interested in. Incredible though it might seem, these girls placed far greater value on the little love they received, suffered in silence when they were rejected, and tried to face the future by looking for other things beyond getting all dressed up for someone else. They were more independent. They took more interest in themselves. Although in Maria's imagination, the world for them must seem unbearable. She knew how attractive she was, and although she rarely listened to her mother, there was one thing her mother said that she never forgot. Beauty, my dear, doesn't last. With this in mind, she continued to keep her boss at arm's length, though without putting him off completely, and this brought her a considerable increase in salary. She worked for 2 years solidly, paid money each month to her parents for her keep, and at last she did it. She saved up enough money to go and spend a week's holiday in the city of her dreams, the place where film and TV stars live, the picture postcard image of her country, Rio de Janeiro. Her boss offered to go with her and to pay all her expenses, but Maria lied to him, saying that since she was going to one of the most dangerous places in the world, the one condition her mother had laid down was that she was to stay at the house of a cousin trained in judo. Besides, sir, she said, you can't just leave the shop without some reliable person to look after it. Don't call me sir, he said, and Maria saw in his eyes something she recognized, the flame of love. And this surprised her, because she had always thought he was only interested in sex. I can give you a house, a family, money for your parents. Thinking of the future, she decided to stoke the fire. She said that she would really miss the job, as well as the colleague she just adored working with, and she promised to take care of her purse and her honor. The truth was quite different. She didn't want anyone at all to spoil what would be her first week of total freedom. She wanted to do everything, swim in the sea, talk to strangers, look in shop windows, and be prepared for a Prince Charming to appear and carry her off for good. Maria traveled for 48 hours by bus, checked into a cheap hotel in Copacabana. Copacabana, that beach, that sky. And even before she had unpacked her bags, she grabbed her bikini and, despite the cloudy weather, made straight for the beach. She looked at the sea fearfully, but ended up wading awkwardly into its waters. When she came out, she was approached by a woman selling sandwiches, by a handsome black man who asked if she wanted to go out with him that night, and by another man who didn't speak a word of Portuguese, but who asked, using gestures, if she would like to have a drink of coconut water. Maria bought a sandwich because she was too embarrassed to say no, but she avoided speaking to the two strangers. She felt suddenly disappointed with herself. Now that she had the chance to do anything she wanted, why was she behaving in this ridiculous manner? Finding no good explanation, she sat down to wait for the sun to come out from behind the clouds. However, the man who couldn't speak Portuguese reappeared at her side, bearing a drink, which he offered to her. Relieved not to have to talk to him, she drank the coconut water and smiled at him, and he smiled back. For some time they kept up this comfortable, meaningless conversation, a smile here, a smile there, until the man took a dictionary out of his pocket and said in a strange accent, "Bonita, pretty." She smiled again. However much she wanted to meet her Prince Charming, he should at least speak her language, and be slightly younger. The man went on leafing through the little book. "Supper? Tonight?" Then he said, "Switzerland." And he completed this with words that sound like the bells of paradise in whatever language they are spoken. Work. Dollars. Maria did not know any restaurant called Switzerland, and could things really be that easy, and dreams so quickly fulfilled? She erred on the side of caution. "Thank you very much for the invitation, but I already have a job, and I'm not interested in buying any dollars." The man, who understood not a word she said, was growing desperate. After many more smiles back and forth, he left her for a few minutes and returned with an interpreter. Through him, he explained that he was from Switzerland, the country, not a restaurant, and that he would like to have supper with her in order to talk to her about a job offer. The interpreter, who introduced himself as a person in charge of foreign tourists and security in the hotel where the man was staying, added on his own account, "I'd accept if I were you. He's an important impresario looking for new talent to work in Europe. If you like, I can put you in touch with some other people who accepted his invitation. Got rich and are now married with children. We won't have to worry about being mugged or unemployed." Then, trying to impress her with his grasp of international culture, he said, "Besides, Switzerland makes excellent chocolates and watches." Maria had been in similar situations before, in which a man promises everything and gives nothing, so she knew that all this talk of acting was just a way of getting her interested. However, convinced that the Virgin had presented her with this chance, convinced that she must enjoy every second of a week's holiday, and because a visit to a good restaurant would provide her with something to talk about when she went home, she decided to accept the invitation, as long as the interpreter came too, for she was already getting tired of smiling and pretending she would understand what the foreigner was saying. The only problem was also the gravest one. She did not have anything suitable to wear. A woman never admits to such things. She would find it easier to admit that her husband had betrayed her than to reveal the state of her wardrobe. But since she did not know these people and might well never see them again, she felt she had nothing to lose. "I just arrived from the northeast, and I haven't got the right clothes to wear to a restaurant." Through the interpreter, the man told her not to worry and asked for the address of her hotel. That evening she received a dress the like of which she had never seen in her entire life, accompanied by a pair of shoes that must have cost as much as she earned in a year. She felt that this was the beginning of the road she had so longed for during her childhood in the Serrao, the Brazilian backlands, putting up with the constant droughts, the boys with no future, the poor but honest town, the dull repetitive way of life. She was ready to be transformed into the princess of the universe. Maria put on her gifts from heaven, spent hours in front of the mirror, regretting not having brought a camera in order to record the moment, only to realize that she was late for her date. She raced off, just like Cinderella, to the hotel where the Swiss gentleman was staying. To her surprise, the interpreter told her that he would not be accompanying them. "Don't worry about the language. What matters is whether or not he feels comfortable with you." "But how can he if he doesn't understand what I'm saying?" "Precisely. You don't need to talk. It's all a question of vibes." Maria didn't know what vibes were. Where she came from, people needed to exchange words, phrases, questions and answers whenever they met. But Mailson, the name of the interpreter cum security officer, assured her that in Rio de Janeiro and the rest of the world, things were different. He doesn't need to understand, just make him feel at ease. He's a widower with no children. He owns a nightclub and is looking for Brazilian women who want to work abroad. He insists that he fell in love with you when he saw you coming out of the water. He thought your bikini was lovely too. He paused. "But, frankly, if you want to find a boyfriend here, you'll have to get a different bikini. No one, apart from this Swiss guy, will go for it. It's really old-fashioned." Maria pretended that she hadn't heard. Mailson went on. "He reckons you've got what it takes to become the main attraction at his club. Of course, he hasn't seen you sing or dance, but beauty is something you're born with. These Europeans are all the same. They come over here and imagine that all Brazilian women are really sensual and know how to samba. If he's serious, I'd advise you to get a signed contract and have the signature verified at the Swiss consulate before leaving the country." The Swiss man, all smiles, took her arm and indicated the taxi awaiting them. "If he has other intentions, and you have them too, then the normal price is $300 a night. Don't accept any less." Before she could say anything, she was on her way to the restaurant, with the man rehearsing the words he wanted to say. The conversation was very simple. Work? Dollars? Brazilian star? Maria, meanwhile, was still thinking. $300 a night. That was a fortune. She didn't need to suffer for love. She could play this man along just as she had her boss at the shop. Get married, have children, and give her parents a comfortable life. What did she have to lose? He was old and he might die before too long, and then she would be rich. These Swiss men obviously had too much money and not enough women back home. They said little over the meal, just the usual exchange of smiles, and Maria gradually began to understand what Maelson had meant by vibes. The man showed her an album containing writing in a language she did not know, photos of women in bikinis, doubtless better and more daring than the one she had worn that afternoon, newspaper cuttings, garish leaflets in which the only word she recognized was Brazil. She drank a lot, afraid that the man would proposition her. After all, even though she had never done this in her life before, no one could turn their nose up at $300. And things always seem simpler with a bit of alcohol inside you, especially if you're among strangers. But the man behaved like a perfect gentleman. In the end, she said she was tired and arranged to meet him on the beach the following day, pointing to her watch, making the movement of the waves with her hands. He seemed pleased and agreed on the time. From Maria's diary on the day that she met the Swiss man.
Everything tells me that I am about to make a wrong decision. But making mistakes is just part of life. What does the world want of me? Does it want me to take no risks, to go back where I came from because I didn't have the courage to say yes to life? I made my first mistake when I was 11 years old, when that boy asked me if I could lend him a pencil. Since then, I've realized that sometimes you get no second chance and that it's best to accept the gifts the world offers you. Of course, it's risky, but is the risk any greater than the chance of the bus that took 48 hours to bring me here having an accident? If I must be faithful to someone or something, then I have, first of all, to be faithful to myself. If I'm looking for true love, I first have to get the mediocre loves out of my system. The little experience of life I've had has taught me that no one owns anything, that everything is an illusion, and that applies to material as well as spiritual things. Anyone who has lost something they thought was theirs forever, as has happened often enough to me already, finally comes to realize that nothing really belongs to them. If nothing belongs to me, then there's no point in wasting my time looking after things that aren't mine. It's best to live as if today were the first or the last day of my life.
The next day, together with Maelson, now, according to him, her agent, she said that she would accept the Swiss man's offer as long as she had a document provided by the Swiss consulate. The foreigner, who seemed accustomed to such demands, said that this was something he wanted too, since if she was to work in his country, she needed a piece of paper proving that no one there could do the job she was proposing to do. And this was not difficult, given that Swiss women had no particular talent for the samba. Together they went to the city centre, and the security officer, come interpreter, come agent, demanded a cash advance as soon as the contract was signed, 30% of the $500 she received. That's a week's payment in advance. 1 week, you understand? You'll be earning $500 a week from now on, but with no deductions, because I only get a commission on the first payment. Samba star, said the Swiss man. Lovely Brazilian samba star. Travel next week. Oh, this was out of the question. Maria couldn't take a decision without first consulting her family. The Swiss man was furious and showed her a copy of the signed contract. and for the first time, she felt afraid. "Contract," he said. She was determined to go home first. The Swiss man, having spent $500, as well as paying out for a pair of shoes, a dress, 2 suppers, and various fees for the paperwork at the consulate, was beginning to get worried. And so, since Maria kept insisting on the need to talk to her family, he decided to buy 2 plane tickets and go with her, as long as they could still travel to Europe the following week. With a smile here and a smile there, she was beginning to understand that this was all in the documents she had signed, and that when it came to seductions, feelings, and contracts, one should never play around. It was a surprise and a source of pride to the small town to see its lovely daughter Maria arrive accompanied by a foreigner who wanted to make her a big star in Europe. The whole neighborhood knew, and her old school friends asked, "How did it happen?" "I was just lucky." They wanted to know if such things were always happening in Rio de Janeiro, because they had seen similar scenarios in TV soaps. Maria would not be pinned down, wanting to place a high value on her personal experience, and thus convince her friends that she was someone special. She and the man went to her house, where he handed round leaflets and the contract, while Maria explained that she had an agent now and intended following a career as an actress. Her mother, seeing the diminutive bikinis worn by the girls in the photos that the foreigner was showing her, immediately gave them back and preferred to ask no questions. All that mattered was that her daughter should be happy and rich, or unhappy, but at least rich. "What's his name?" "Roger." "Rogerio. I had a cousin called Rogerio." The man smiled, and they all realized he hadn't understood a word. Maria's father said, "He's about the same age as me." Her mother told him not to interfere with their daughter's happiness. Since all seamstresses talk a great deal to their customers and acquire a great deal of knowledge about marriage and love, her advice to Maria was this: "My dear, it's better to be unhappy with a rich man than happy with a poor man. And over there, you'll have far more chance of becoming an unhappy rich woman. Besides, if it doesn't work out, you can just get on the bus and come home." Maria said, simply to be provocative, "Mama, there isn't a bus from Europe to Brazil. Besides, I want a career as a performer. I'm not looking for marriage." Her mother gave her a look of despair. "If you can go there, you can always come back. Being a performer, an actress, is fine for a young woman, but it only lasts as long as your looks, and they start to fade when you're about 30. So make the most of things now. Find someone who's honest and loving and marry him. Love isn't that important. I didn't love your father at first, but money buys everything, even true love. And look at your father. He's not even rich." It was bad advice from a friend, but good advice from a mother. 48 hours later, Maria was back in Rio, though not without first having made a visit, alone, to her old place of work, in order to hand in her resignation, and to hear the owner of the shop say, "I can't stop you going in pursuit of your happiness, but I want you to know something before you leave." He took a medal on a chain out of his pocket. "It's the miraculous medal of Our Lady of the Graces. She has a church in Paris, so go there and pray for her protection. Look, there are words engraved around the Virgin." Maria read, "Hail Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who turn to you. Amen." Remember to say those words at least once a day, and if you come back, I'll be waiting for you. I missed my chance to tell you something very simple. I love you. It may be too late now, but I wanted you to know." Missed chances. She had learned very early on what that meant. "I love you," though, were words she had often heard during her 22 years, and it seemed to her that they were now completely devoid of meaning, because they had never turned into anything serious or deep, never translated into a lasting relationship. Maria thanked him for his words, noted them in her memory. One never knows what life may have in store for us, and it's always good to know where the emergency exit is. Gave him a chaste kiss, and left, without a backward glance. They returned to Rio, and important purchases were made. Clothes, shoes, makeup, everything that a woman like her could want. On the eve of their departure for Europe, they went to a nightclub, and when Roger saw her dance, he felt pleased with his choice. This lovely, dark girl with her pale eyes and hair as black as the wing of the grauna. So they packed their bags, and the following day they were flying to the land of chocolate, clocks, and cheese, with Maria secretly planning to make this man fall in love with her. After all, he wasn't old, ugly, or poor. What more could she want? Maria arrived in Geneva exhausted, her heart contracted with fear. She realized that she was completely dependent on the man at her side. She had no knowledge of the country, the language, or the cold. Roger's behavior changed. He no longer made any attempt to be pleasant, and the look in his eyes grew distant. He installed her in a small hotel, introducing her to another young Brazilian woman, a sad creature called Vivian, who would prepare her for work. Vivian looked her coolly up and down without the least show of sympathy, and got straight to business. "Don't delude yourself. He flies off to Brazil whenever one of his dancers gets married. He knows what you want, adventure, money, or a husband." How did she know? Was everyone looking for the same thing? "All the girls here are looking for one of those 3 things," Vivian went on. "As for adventure, it's too cold, and you won't earn enough to go off traveling. As for money, once the cost of the room and board has been deducted, you'll have to work for nearly a year just to pay for your flight back home. But I know that isn't what you agreed. But like everyone else, you forgot to ask. If you had been more careful and read the contract you signed, you would know exactly what you were getting yourself into. Because the Swiss don't lie. They just rely on silence to help them." Maria felt the ground shifting beneath her. "And as for a husband, every time a girl gets married, that represents a great financial loss for Roger, so we're forbidden to talk to the customers. This isn't a pick-up place like in Rue de Berne. Men come here with their wives, and the few tourists who turn up get one whiff of the family atmosphere and go looking for women elsewhere. I presume you know how to dance. Well, if you can sing as well, your salary will increase. But so will the other girls' envy, so I'd suggest you forget it. Above all, don't use the phone. You'll spend everything you earn on it, and that won't be much." "You promised me $500 a week." "Oh, yeah?" From Maria's diary during her second week in Switzerland.
I went to the nightclub and met the dance director who comes from somewhere called Morocco, and I had to learn every step of what he, who has never set foot in Brazil, thinks is the samba. I didn't even have time to recover from the long flight. I had to start smiling and dancing on the very first night. There are 6 of us, and not one of us is happy. The customers drink and applaud, blow kisses and privately make obscene gestures, but that's as far as it goes. I got paid yesterday, barely 1/10 of what we agreed. The rest, according to the contract, will be used to pay for my flight and my stay here. According to Vivian's calculations, that will take a year, which means that during that time, there's no escape. And what's the point of escaping anyway? I've only just arrived. I haven't seen anything yet. What's so awful about having to dance 7 nights a week? I used to do that for pleasure. Now I do it for money and fame. My legs don't ache. The only difficult thing is maintaining that fixed smile. I can choose either to be a victim of the world or an adventurer in search of treasure. It's all a question of how I view my life.
Maria chose to be an adventurer. She put aside her feelings. She stopped crying every night, and she forgot all about the person she used to be. She discovered that she had enough willpower to pretend that she had just been born, and so had no reason to miss anyone. Feelings could wait. Now what she needed to do was to earn some money, get to know the country, and return home victorious. Besides, everything around her was very like Brazil in general, and her own small town in particular. The women spoke Portuguese, complained about men, talked loudly, moaned about their working hours, turned up late at the club, defied the boss, thought themselves the most beautiful women in the world, and told stories about their Prince Charmings, who were usually married or had no money and so sponged off them. Contrary to what she had imagined from the leaflets Roger had brought with him, the club was exactly as Vivian had said it was. It had a family atmosphere. The girls, described on their work permits as samba dancers, were not allowed to go out with the customers. Maria, who had expected something more exciting, gradually allowed herself to succumb to sadness and boredom. During the first 2 weeks, she barely left the boarding house where she was living, especially when she discovered that no one spoke her language, even if she said everything very slowly. Finally, in the long, tedious hours spent in her small, TV-less room, she concluded, A, she would never find what she was looking for if she couldn't express herself. In order to do that, she needed to learn the local language. B, since all her colleagues were looking for the same thing, she needed to be different. For that particular problem, she as yet lacked a solution or a method. From Maria's diary, 4 weeks after arriving in Geneva.
I've already been here an eternity. I don't speak the language. I spend all day listening to music on the radio, looking around my room, thinking about Brazil, longing for work to begin, and when I'm working, longing to get back to the boarding house. In other words, I am living the future, not the present. One day, at some distant future date, I'll get my ticket home, and I can go back to Brazil, marry the owner of the draper's shop, and listen to the malicious comments of those friends who, never having taken any risks themselves, can only see other people's failures. No, I can't go back like that. I'd rather throw myself out of the plane as it's crossing the ocean. Since you can't open the windows in the plane, I had never expected that. What a shame not to be able to breathe in the pure air. I will die here. But before I die, I want to fight for life. If I can walk on my own, I can go wherever I like.
The following day, she enrolled in a French course that was run in the mornings, and there she met people of all creeds, beliefs, and ages. Men wearing brightly coloured clothes and lots of gold bracelets. Women who always wore a headscarf. Children who learned more quickly than the grown-ups, when it should have been the other way round, since grown-ups have more experience. She felt proud when she found out that everyone knew about her country. Carnival, the samba, football, and the most famous person in the world, Pelé. In the afternoons, so as to practice the language, she took her first steps around the city. She discovered some delicious chocolate, a cheese she had never eaten before, a huge fountain in the middle of the lake, snow, which no one back home had ever touched, storks, and restaurants with fireplaces. Although she never went inside, just seeing the fire blazing away gave her a pleasant feeling of well-being. She was also surprised to find that not all the shop signs advertised clocks. There were banks, too, although she couldn't understand why there were so many for so few inhabitants, and why she rarely saw anyone inside them. She decided, however, not to ask any questions. After 3 months of keeping a tight rein on herself at work, her Brazilian blood, as sensual and sexual as everyone thinks, made its voice heard. She fell in love with an Arab who was studying French with her. The affair lasted 3 weeks, until she decided to take time off and visit a mountain on the outskirts of Geneva. This provoked a summons to Roger's office as soon as she arrived at work the following day. No sooner had she opened the door than she was summarily dismissed for setting a bad example to the other girls working there. A hysterical Roger said that yet again he had been let down, that Brazilian women couldn't be trusted. Maria might be young, but she was no fool. Especially once her Arab lover had told her that Swiss employment laws were very strict. And since the nightclub kept back a large part of her salary, she could easily allege that she was being used for slave labor. She went back to Roger's office, this time speaking reasonable French, which now included the word lawyer. She left with a few insults and $5,000 in compensation, a sum of money beyond her wildest dreams, and all because of that magic word, lawyer. Now she was free to spend time with her Arab lover, buy presents, take some photos of the snow, and go back home in triumph. The first thing she did was telephone her mother's neighbor to say she was happy, had a brilliant career ahead of her, and that there was no need for her family to worry. Then, since she had to leave the boarding house that Roger had arranged for her, she had no alternative but to go to her Arab boyfriend, swear undying love, convert to his religion, and marry him, even if she had to wear one of those strange headscarves. After all, as everyone knew, all Arabs were extremely wealthy, and that was enough. The Arab, however, was already far away, possibly in Arabia, a country Maria had never even heard of. And deep down, she gave thanks to the Virgin Mary, because she had not been obliged to betray her religion. She now had a reasonable grasp of spoken French, enough money for her return ticket, a work permit as a samba dancer, and a current visa. So, knowing that she could always go back and marry her former boss, she decided to find her true destiny as a model. She rented a small room, and the following day started doing the rounds of the agencies. They all told her that she needed to get some professional photos taken. But this, after all, was an investment in her career. Dreams don't come cheap. She spent a large part of her money on an excellent photographer. He had a vast selection of clothes in his studio, and she posed for him in various outfits, sober and extravagant. She asked for extra copies and sent them off to her family, with a letter saying how happy she was in Switzerland. They would all think she was rich and the owner of an enviable wardrobe, and that she had been transformed into her town's most illustrious daughter. If all went to plan, and she had read enough books on positive thinking to be convinced that victory was assured, she would be greeted by a brass band on her return home, and would try to persuade the mayor to have a square named after her. Since she had no permanent address, she bought a mobile phone and waited for job offers. She ate in Chinese restaurants, which were the cheapest, and to pass the time, she studied furiously. But time dragged, and the telephone didn't ring. To her surprise, no one bothered her when she went for walks by the lake, apart from a few drug pushers who always hung around underneath one of the bridges that connect the lovely old public gardens to the newer part of the city. She began to doubt her looks, until an ex-colleague, whom she bumped into by chance in a cafe, told her that it wasn't her fault. It was the fault of the Swiss, who hate to bother anyone, and of other foreigners who were all afraid of being arrested for sexual harassment, a concept invented to make women everywhere feel worse about themselves. From Maria's diary, one night when she lacked the courage to go out, to live, or to continue waiting for the phone call that never came.
I spent today outside a fun fair. Since I can't afford to fritter my money away, I thought it best just to watch other people. I stood for a long time by the roller coaster, and I noticed that most people get on it in search of excitement, but that once it starts they are terrified and want the cars to stop. What do they expect? Having chosen adventure, shouldn't they be prepared to go the whole way? Or do they think that the intelligent thing to do would be to avoid the ups and downs and spend all their time on a carousel going round and round on the spot? At the moment, I'm far too lonely to think about love. But I have to believe that it will happen, that I will find a job, and that I am here because I chose this fate. The roller coaster is my life. Life is a fast, dizzying game. Life is a parachute jump. It's taking chances, falling over and getting up again. It's mountaineering. It's wanting to get to the very top of yourself and to feel angry and dissatisfied when you don't manage it. It isn't easy being far from my family and from the language in which I can express all my feelings and emotions. But from now on, whenever I feel depressed, I will remember that funfair. If I had fallen asleep and suddenly woken up on a roller coaster, what would I feel? Well, I would feel trapped and sick, terrified of every bend, wanting to get off. However, if I believe that the track is my destiny and that God is in charge of the machine, then the nightmare becomes something thrilling. It becomes exactly what it is, a roller coaster. A safe, reliable toy which will eventually stop. But while the journey lasts, I must look at the surrounding landscape and whoop with excitement.
Although she was capable of writing very wise thoughts, she was quite incapable of following her own advice. Her periods of depression became more frequent, and the phone still refused to ring. To distract herself during these empty hours, and in order to practice her French, she began buying magazines about celebrities, but realized at once that she was spending too much money, and so she looked for the nearest lending library. The woman in charge told her that they didn't lend out magazines, but that she could suggest a few books that would help improve her French. "I haven't got time to read books." "What do you mean you haven't got time? What are you doing?" "Lots of things. Studying French, writing a diary, and what?" She was about to say, waiting for the phone to ring, but she thought it best to say nothing. "My dear, you're still very young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Read. Forget everything you've been told about books and just read." "I've read loads of books." Suddenly, Maria remembered what Mailson had told her about vibes. The librarian before her seemed a very sweet, sensitive person, someone who might be able to help her if all else failed. She needed to win her over. Her instinct was telling her that this woman could become her friend. She quickly changed tack. "But I'd like to read more. Could you help me choose some books?" The woman brought her The Little Prince. She started it that night and saw the drawings on the first page of what seemed to be a hat, but which, according to the author, all children would instantly recognize as a snake with an elephant inside it. "But I don't think I can ever have been a child then," she thought. "To me, it looks more like a hat." She accompanied the prince on his journeys, feeling sad whenever the word love appeared, for she had forbidden herself to think about the subject at the risk of feeling suicidal. However, apart from the painful romantic scenes between a prince, a fox, and a rose, the book was really interesting. Maria became a regular visitor to the library, where she would chat to the woman, who seemed as lonely as she was, ask her to suggest more books and discuss life and authors, until her money had nearly run out. Another 2 weeks, and she would not even have enough left to buy her ticket back to Brazil. And since life always waits for some crisis to occur before revealing itself at its most brilliant, the phone finally rang. 3 months after discovering the word lawyer, Maria learned from a model agency that an Arab gentleman who worked in the fashion industry in his country had been very taken by her photos and wanted to invite her to take part in a fashion show. They arranged to meet in a very chic restaurant. Maria found herself with an elegant man, older and more charming than Roger, who asked her, "Do you know who painted that picture over there? It's a Miro. Have you heard of Juan Miro?" Maria said nothing, as if she were concentrating on the food. Meanwhile, she made a mental note. On her next visit to the library, she would have to ask for a book about Miro. But the Arab was saying, "This was the table where Fellini always sat. Do you know his films?" She said she adored them. The man began asking more probing questions, and Maria, knowing she would fail the test, decided to be straight with him. "I'm not going to spend the evening pretending to you. I can just about tell the difference between Coca-Cola and Pepsi, but that's about it. I thought we came here to discuss a fashion show." He seemed to appreciate her frankness. "We'll do that when we have our after-supper drink." There was a pause, while they looked at each other, each trying to imagine what the other was thinking. "You're very pretty," said the man. "If you come up and have a drink with me in my hotel room, I'll give you 1,000 francs. Maria understood at once. Was it the fault of the model agency? Was it her fault? Should she have found out more about the nature of this supper? It wasn't the agency's fault, or hers, or the man's. This was simply how things worked. Suddenly she missed her hometown, missed Brazil, missed her mother's arms. She remembered Mailson when he had mentioned a fee of $300, much more than she would have expected to receive for spending the night with a man. However, she had no one she could talk to. She was alone in a strange city, a relatively experienced 22-year-old, but none of her experience could help her to decide which would be the best response. "Could you pour me some more wine, please?" The Arab man filled her glass, and her thoughts traveled faster than the little prince on his travels to all those planets. She had come in search of adventure, money, and possibly a husband. She had known that she would end up getting proposals such as this because she was used to the ways of men. She still believed in model agencies, stardom, a rich husband, a family, children, grandchildren, nice clothes, a triumphant return to the place where she was born. She dreamed of overcoming all difficulties purely by her own intelligence, charm, and willpower. But reality had just fallen in on her. To the man's surprise, she began to cry. He did not know what to do, caught between his fear of causing a scandal and his instinctive desire to protect her. He called the waiter over to ask for the bill, but Maria stopped him. "No, don't do that. Pour some more wine. Just let me cry for a while." And Maria thought about the little boy who had asked to borrow a pencil, about the young man who had kissed her, and how she had kept her mouth closed, about her excitement at seeing Rio for the first time, about the men who had used her and given nothing back, about the passions and loves lost along the way. Despite her apparent freedom, her life consisted of endless hours spent waiting for a miracle, for true love, for an adventure with the same romantic ending she had seen in films and read about in books. A writer once said that it is not time that changes man, nor knowledge. The only thing that can change someone's mind is love. What nonsense. The person who wrote that clearly knew only one side of the coin. Love was undoubtedly one of the things capable of changing a person's whole life, but there was the other side of the coin. Despair. Yeah, perhaps love could transform someone, but despair did the job more quickly. What should she do? Should she run back to Brazil, become a teacher of French, and marry her former boss? Should she take a small step forward? After all, it was only one night, in a city where she knew no one and no one knew her. Would that one night and that easy money mean that she would inevitably carry on until she reached a point in the road where there was no turning back? What was happening here? A great opportunity? Or a test set her by the Virgin Mary? At last, after what seemed an eternity, Maria spoke. "Did you say 1,000 francs for one drink?" She was surprised by her own tone of voice. "Yes," said the man, regretting having suggested it in the first place. "But I really wouldn't want. Pay the bill, and let's go and have that drink at your hotel." She seemed like a stranger to herself. Up until then, she had been a nice, cheerful, well-brought-up girl, and she would never have spoken like that to a stranger. But that girl, it seemed to her, had died forever. Before her lay another existence, in which drinks cost 1,000 francs, or, to use a more universal currency, about $600. And everything happened as expected. She went to the Arab's hotel, drank champagne, got herself completely drunk, opened her legs, waited for him to have an orgasm. It didn't even occur to her to pretend to have one too. Washed herself in the marble bathroom, picked up the money, and allowed herself the luxury of a taxi home. She fell into bed and slept dreamlessly. From Maria's diary, the next day.
I remember everything, although not the moment when I made the decision. Oddly enough, I have no sense of guilt. I used to think of girls who went to bed with men for money as people who had no other choice. And now I see that it isn't like that. I could have said yes or no. No one was forcing me to accept anything. I don't feel in the least bit sorry for myself. I am still not a victim because I could have left that restaurant with my dignity intact and my purse empty. I could have given that man sitting opposite me a lesson in morality, or tried to make him see that before him sat a princess who should be wooed, not bought. I could have responded in all kinds of ways. In the search for happiness, however, we are all equal. None of us is happy.
As easy as that. There she was, in a strange city where she knew no one, but what had been a torment to her yesterday, today gave her a tremendous sense of freedom, because she didn't need to explain herself to anyone. She decided that, for the first time in many years, she would devote the entire day to thinking about herself. She went out early, had breakfast in her usual cafe, went for a stroll around the lake, and saw a demonstration held by refugees. A woman, out walking a dog, told her they were Kurds, and Maria, instead of pretending that she knew the answer in order to prove that she was more cultivated and intelligent than people might think, asked, "Where do Kurds come from?" To her surprise, the woman didn't know. That's what the world is like. People talk as if they knew everything, but if you dare to ask the question, they don't know anything. She went into an internet cafe and discovered that Kurds come from Kurdistan, a non-existent country now divided between Turkey and Iraq. I'm just like that woman, really. Or rather, that's what I used to be like, someone pretending to know everything, until I finally had the courage to say the only thing I knew was how to tell the difference between two soft drinks. Whenever I try to appear more intelligent than I am, I always lose out. Well, enough is enough. She thought of the model agency. Did they know what the Arab guy really wanted, or had they genuinely thought he was going to find work for her in his country? Whatever the truth, Maria felt less alone on that grey morning in Geneva, with the temperature close to 0. She was less alone because by her side was another woman, invisible to passers-by. She had never noticed her presence before, but there she was. She smiled at the invisible woman beside her, who looked like the Virgin Mary. The woman smiled back and told her to be careful. Things were not as simple as she imagined. Maria ignored the advice and replied that she was a grown-up and responsible for her own decisions. She had learned that there were people prepared to pay 1,000 Swiss francs for half an hour between her legs, and all she had to decide was whether to take her 1,000 Swiss francs and buy a plane ticket back to the town where she had been born, or to stay and earn enough to buy her parents a house, some lovely clothes for herself, and tickets to all the places she had dreamed of visiting. The invisible woman at her side said again that things weren't that simple. But Maria asked her not to interrupt, because she needed to make some important decisions. She began to analyze more carefully this time the possibility of going back to Brazil. Her school friends, who had never left the town they were born in, would all say that she had been fired, that she had never had the talent to be an international star. Her mother would be sad never to have received her promised monthly sum of money, although Maria, in her letters, had assured her that the post office must be stealing it. Her father would, forever after, look at her with that "I told you so" expression on his face. She would go back to working in the shop, and she would marry the owner. She, who had travelled in a plane, eaten Swiss cheese, learned French, and walked in the snow. On the other hand, there were those drinks that had earned her 1,000 francs. In a year, she could earn enough money to return to the world on her own terms. The only real problem was that she didn't know how to start. She remembered from her days at the nightclub that a girl had mentioned somewhere called Rue de Berne. She went over to one of the large panels that can be found everywhere in Geneva, that most tourist-friendly of cities. Maria studied the map for 15 minutes. It's not a very big city, and finally found the place she was looking for. Her invisible friend, who had remained silent while she was studying the map, was now trying to reason with her. It wasn't a question of morality, but of setting off down a road of no return. Maria said that if she could earn enough money to go back home, then she could earn enough to get out of any situation. "We live in a vale of tears," she said to her invisible friend. "We can have all the dreams we like, but life is hard, implacable, sad. What are you trying to say? The people will condemn me? No one will ever know. This is just one phase of my life." With a sad, sweet smile, the invisible friend disappeared. Maria went to the fun fair and bought a ticket for the roller coaster. She screamed along with everyone else, knowing that there was no real danger. It was all just a game. She was happy. She didn't need to wait for a phone call now or to watch every centime she spent. Later that day, she left a message with the agency to thank them and to tell them that the meeting had gone well. If they were genuine, they would ask about the photos. If they were procurers of women, they would arrange more meetings. From Maria's diary that night, with a note in the margin saying, "Not sure."
I have discovered the reason why a man pays for a woman. He wants to be happy. He wouldn't pay 1,000 francs just to have an orgasm. He wants to be happy. I do too, everyone does. And yet no one is. And what have I got to lose if, for a while, I decide to become it's a difficult word to think or even write, but let's be blunt. What have I got to lose if I decide to become a prostitute for a while? Honor, dignity, self-respect. Although, when I think about it, I've never had any of those things. I didn't ask to be born. I've never found anyone to love me. I've always made the wrong decisions. Now I'm letting life decide for me.